She fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder somewhere outside Charlotte and woke up engaged to a man she had never spoken to. No name, no memory, no man in the seat beside her, just cold coffee, a fogged window, and a ring so heavy with stone that her hand actually ached under it, sitting on her finger like it had been there her whole life. The last thing Hannah Adams remembered was closing her eyes somewhere around Roanoke, telling herself she'd only rest them for a minute. But somebody made a decision about the rest of her life in that gap. She has no idea who, no idea why, and no idea what happens the moment she tries to take it off. 6 weeks from now, she would understand exactly what that ring cost her. By then, it would already be too late to walk away.
Welcome back, besties. Grab a drink, get comfortable, because you're definitely going to want to stay until the end of this one. Now let's dive straight into today's story.
3 days earlier, Hannah Adams was exactly the kind of woman nobody looks at twice on a night bus. 34 years old, an ER nurse working overnight shifts at a hospital in Richmond, riding the cheap overnight coach line, instead of flying, because flying cost money she didn't have, and the difference between a plane ticket and a bus ticket was the difference between paying her mother's assisted living bill on time or 2 weeks late. She'd been doing that math in her head for 3 years now, ever since her father passed and left her mother's care entirely in her hands. Ever since her fiancé of 4 years, a contractor named Marcus, decided the wedding could wait indefinitely, and then decided Hannah herself could wait indefinitely too, right up until he stopped waiting altogether and married someone with fewer obligations. Hannah didn't talk about any of that anymore. She'd learned that people got uncomfortable around a woman who worked doubles and visited her mother on her one day off, and hadn't been on a real date in 2 years. So she kept her head down, she worked, and twice a month she took the overnight bus to Atlanta to see her mother, because visiting hours were easier to make on a Saturday morning than after a red-eye flight landed her exhausted at 6 a.m. That particular Friday night, Hannah had just come off a 16-hour shift. A car accident had brought in 4 patients at once. She'd held pressure on a wound with her bare hands for 11 minutes waiting for a surgeon, talked a terrified teenager through a panic attack while stitching his forehead, and by the time her shift ended, her whole body felt like it belonged to somebody else. She got on that bus running on fumes and black coffee, found her seat by the window, and was asleep before the bus even pulled out of the station. She didn't notice when a man got on 2 stops later and sat down beside her. She didn't notice him at all, not really, not with her eyes closed and her head already tipping sideways toward the window. What she would remember later, in fragments, was warmth. A shoulder that didn't pull away when her head landed on it. A stillness beside her that felt, strangely, safer than being awake. She had no idea the man sitting next to her was being hunted. Ri Jun-seo did not take overnight buses. Men like him did not take buses at all. Not normally. Not when private cars and private planes existed specifically so men like him never had to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers who might recognize his face from the wrong headline. But that Friday night, Jun-seo had exactly one advantage left, and it was this. Nobody expected to find him on a Greyhound. 3 days earlier, someone inside his own organization had tried to kill him. Not a rival, not a stranger. Someone who had access to his schedule, his security detail, the exact minute-by-minute movement of his life, which meant the list of suspects was short, and every name on it made his stomach turn. The attempt failed. The man who pulled the trigger did not survive long enough to explain who sent him. And in the 72 hours since, Jun-seo had done the only thing that made sense to a man who no longer knew who around him could be trusted. He disappeared. No security detail. No car with his family's crest on the plates. Just a rented duffel bag, a change of clothes bought with cash, and a bus ticket purchased under a name that wasn't his. He had one piece of leverage left in the world. A ring that had belonged to his grandmother, sewn into the lining of his jacket, small enough to hide, valuable enough that if everything else fell apart, it could buy him passage somewhere far from Seoul, and far from whoever wanted him dead. He sat down next to a sleeping stranger because the seat was empty, and empty seats didn't ask questions. He did not expect to feel her head drop onto his shoulder 40 minutes later. He did not expect, when he glanced down to see who it was, to find a woman who looked more exhausted than dangerous, her hands still faintly stained at the cuticles with something that looked clinical, professional, someone who worked with her hands for a living and worked hard. He did not expect to sit there for the next 3 hours, rigid and alert, watching the road behind them through the reflection in the window, and find something almost unbearably calming about the fact that this stranger trusted him enough, unconsciously, completely, to sleep. Somewhere outside Danville, his phone buzzed. Not his real phone. The burner. Only one person had that number, a cousin he trusted with his life, and the message was 4 words long. They know you're moving. Jun Seo's blood went cold. If they knew he was moving, that meant someone had eyes on this exact bus. Or worse, eyes that would be waiting at the next stop. He had seconds, not minutes, to decide what to do. And in those seconds, staring down at a sleeping stranger whose face he'd never really looked at until that moment, he made a decision that he would spend the next 6 weeks trying to justify to himself, to her, and eventually, to men holding guns in a hospital hallway who wanted to know exactly why she mattered to him. He took his grandmother's ring out of the lining of his jacket, and very carefully, without waking her, he slid it onto her finger. If anyone was watching this bus, if anyone had a photograph of him boarding, they would be looking for a single man traveling alone. Not a man with a fiancé. Not a woman wearing a ring that any Korean intelligence network would recognize instantly as belonging to the Ri family. A ring worth more than most people's houses. A ring that had exactly one purpose in this situation. To make Hannah Adams look, for the next several hours, like she belonged to him. He got off at the very next stop, disappearing into the dark before the driver had even finished calling out the station name, leaving behind a stranger, a ring, and a decision that would follow both of them for the rest of their lives. Now here's what I want to know. If you woke up wearing a stranger's ring with no explanation at all, would you take it off immediately, or would some part of you want to know why?
Drop your answer in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't.
Hannah woke up outside of Atlanta with a headache, a dry mouth, and a ring on her finger that she absolutely did not put there. Her first thought was that she was still dreaming. Her second thought, once she'd blinked hard enough to convince herself she was awake, was pure panic. She twisted the ring, tried to pull it off, and found it wouldn't budge past her knuckle, swollen slightly from the long ride and the dry bus air. She looked around. The seat beside her was empty, had been empty, apparently for a while, based on how cold it felt.
Excuse me, did you see the man who was sitting here? Got off somewhere around Danville, I think. Didn't really notice him.
Hannah spent the rest of the ride staring at the ring, turning it in the weak morning light, trying to convince herself it was cheap, costume, nothing worth the anxiety pooling in her stomach. But she'd worked in an ER long enough to know the weight of real stones, and this ring was heavier than anything she'd ever held in her life. By the time the bus pulled into the Atlanta station, she had talked herself into 3 different explanations and believed none of them. She almost didn't notice the 2 men waiting at the gate. They weren't dressed like anyone she'd expect to see at a bus station at 7 in the morning. Dark suits, no luggage, standing too still, scanning the disembarking passengers with the kind of focus that made Hannah's ER instincts flare, the same instincts that told her within seconds of a patient walking through triage whether something serious was wrong. One of the men's eyes moved down the line of passengers and stopped, hard, on her hand. He said something into a small radio clipped to his collar, and both men started walking directly toward her. Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs. Every instinct told her to run, but she was boxed in by the crowd disembarking behind her, and before she could decide what to do, the taller of the 2 men was standing directly in front of her, blocking her path entirely.
Ma'am, that ring, where did you get it?
I don't know.
Hannah said honestly, which was somehow the worst possible answer, because both men's expressions shifted immediately into something sharper, more alert. You need to come with us, the man said. I'm not going anywhere with you, Hannah said, backing up a step, her voice rising enough that a few nearby travelers turned to look. I don't know either of you. I don't know what this ring is. Somebody put it on my finger while I was asleep on the bus, and I want it off just as much as you apparently want it off me. The second man said something quiet in Korean to the first, and whatever it was made the first man's posture change, softening slightly, though the wariness never left his eyes. You slept beside a man on that bus, the second man said. Tall, dark coat. Did not speak to you. Yes, Hannah said carefully. He was gone when I woke up. The two men exchanged another look. This time it wasn't suspicion on their faces. It was something closer to alarm. We are not here to hurt you, the second man said. My name is Park. This is Sue. We work for the family that Ring belongs to. If Ri Jun-so gave it to you, even without your knowledge, you are now standing somewhere very dangerous, and we need you to trust us enough to come somewhere safe, before certain people realize what we already know. Hannah stood frozen in the middle of a bus station, a stranger's family ring locked onto her finger, two men she'd never met telling her she was in danger because of a decision made by a man whose name she was hearing for the first time, and somewhere behind all of it, underneath the fear, a small, sharp, unwelcome curiosity that would not let her simply turn and walk away. I have a visit scheduled with my mother, Hannah said, because it was the only thing she could think to say, the only piece of her ordinary life she could hold on to in that moment. We will take you to her first, Park said, and then we need to talk. Something was already unraveling behind the scenes that Hannah couldn't see, something that had started 3 days earlier with a bullet that missed and would not stop unraveling until it reached a hospital hallway and a decision that would define the rest of her life. But she didn't know any of that yet. All she knew, standing in that station with a ring she couldn't remove, and two strangers who somehow knew more about her morning than she did, was that whatever normal life she'd been living was over the moment she fell asleep on that bus. The safe house Park and Sue took her to wasn't what Hannah expected. No mansion, no obvious wealth, just a quiet brick house in a residential Atlanta neighborhood, the kind of place that blended in perfectly, curtains drawn, a car in the driveway that looked 10 years old but was, Hannah would later learn, armored from the inside out. Ri Jun-so was already there. He looked different from what she vaguely remembered of the man on the bus. Less exhausted, more composed, dressed now in a plain gray sweater that did nothing to disguise the way the entire room seemed to organize itself around wherever he stood. When Hannah walked in, he stood up immediately, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all.
You put a ring on my finger while I was sleeping. That's not something you get to do to a stranger and then just disappear.
I know, and I'm sorry. Truly. If there had been another option in that moment, I would have taken it.
Explain it to me, all of it. Because right now I have two men telling me I'm in danger, a headache that won't quit, and a ring I can't get off my finger, and none of that is an acceptable way to start a Saturday.
So he explained it, the attempt on his life 3 days earlier. The mole somewhere inside his own organization, someone with access nobody outside a small circle should have had. The decision, made in a panic at 2 a.m, on a bus outside Danville, to use a family heirloom to disguise himself, and how that decision had, without his intending it, pulled a complete stranger directly into the middle of a war she had no part in starting.
The ring identifies you as connected to my family. To anyone who recognizes it, and there are people who would recognize it instantly, it means you are protected by us, or valuable to us, or a target because of us. There is no version of that ring on your hand that does not put you inside this.
Then take it back. Take it off. Whatever's happening between you and whoever's hunting you, it's not my problem.
It won't come off, Jun-seo said quietly. Suh already tried while you were resting in the other room. It's an old design, meant to only be removed by the person who placed it, and I don't have the tools here to do that safely without hurting your finger. We can get it removed properly, but it will take time, and until then, anyone watching for that ring will be watching for you. Hannah looked down at her hand, at the ring that had turned her entire life sideways in the span of one bus ride, and felt something cold settle into her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with fury. I have a mother in a memory care facility, 20 minutes from here, she said. I have a job I cannot afford to lose. I have exactly 1 weekend a month, where my whole life doesn't feel like it's falling apart, and you have managed to make even that impossible in less than 12 hours. I know, Junseo said again, and something in his voice, quiet and genuinely ashamed, made Hannah's anger falter slightly despite herself. I will fix this. I promise you that. But I need you to understand something else too. Whoever tried to have me killed 3 days ago is not going to stop looking just because I disappeared. And now, because of a decision I made in a moment of panic, they have a reason to look for you as well. Hannah sat down slowly in the chair across from him, her legs suddenly unwilling to hold her up any longer. Why me? She asked. Out of every seat on that bus, why did you sit next to me? It was the only empty seat left, Junseo said honestly. That's all it was. Bad luck. Or maybe not luck at all. I've had 3 days to think about it, and I still don't have a better answer than that. Something about his honesty, the plainness of it, the lack of any smooth explanation designed to make her feel better, settled Hannah more than any reassurance could have. She'd spent 4 years with a man who always had a smooth explanation, and every single one of them had eventually turned out to be a lie. Fine, Hannah said finally. Then tell me how we fix this, because I am not spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for people hunting a ring I never asked for. That was the moment, though neither of them fully understood it yet, that Hannah Adams stopped being a bystander in Ri Junso's war and became, without ever intending to, one of its central players.
Comment below if you think Hannah should run while she still can, or stay and fight for answers. I read every single one of your comments, and I want to know what you'd do in her shoes.
The next several days blurred together in a way that would have terrified Hannah if she'd had the energy left to be terrified. She was moved twice more, each time to a different safe house, each time with less warning than the last. Park and Sue rotated watches outside whatever door she slept behind. Junseo called her mother's facility himself, using a false name and a donation large enough that nobody there asked a single question when Hannah's usual Saturday visit turned into a video call instead, her mother's confused, gentle voice on the screen, asking why Hannah looked so tired, and Hannah lying through her teeth about a bad flu going around the hospital. She should have hated every second of it. Instead, somewhere in the middle of the second week, she found herself sitting across a kitchen table from Junseo at 2 a.m, both of them unable to sleep, and realized she didn't hate any of it nearly as much as she should have.
You don't talk like I expected.
What did you expect?
I don't know. Someone colder. Someone who treats people like pieces on a board. Everything I've read about men like you online makes it sound like that's all any of this is.
I have made decisions that would make you see me exactly that way. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make you more comfortable. But there are rules I don't break, even in a world that doesn't reward keeping them. No harm to people outside the business. No harm to family, even family that turns against you, if there's any other option. My father built this organization on the idea that power without restraint eventually destroys the man holding it. I've tried to hold on to that, even when it costs me.
Did it cost you? Hannah asked. Whoever's hunting you now. Junseo was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. I believe the person behind this is someone I chose not to remove years ago, when I had every justification to. Someone who has spent that time since deciding my mercy was weakness instead of principle. Who? Hannah asked. A man named Choi Bumjin, Junseo said. He ran logistics for my father for 15 years. 3 years ago, my father discovered he'd been skimming shipments. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. My father wanted him removed permanently. I argued for exile instead. A payout, a warning, a way out that didn't end with a body. My father was dying by then. He let me have my way as a kind of last gift. Bumjin took the payout, disappeared for 2 years, and apparently spent that time building exactly the kind of network necessary to come back and finish what he never got to start. So this is about revenge, Hannah said. It's about proving a point, Junseo said. That mercy is a flaw in me specifically. That the organization is only as strong as the man leading it, and if he can be shown to be weak once, he can be removed entirely. Hannah thought about that for a long time, staring down at the ring she still hadn't managed to remove, thinking about competence, about the way weakness and mercy so often got confused with each other by people who had never had to hold both at once. I don't think that's weakness, she said finally. I've watched men in the ER decide not to escalate a fight that would have ended in someone dying when every instinct in the room told them to. That's not softness. That takes more control than most people have. Junso looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that Hannah couldn't quite name yet. Nobody has said that to me in 3 years, he said quietly. It took another 12 days for Choi Bumjin's people to find them. Hannah heard the first gunshot before she fully understood what it was, some part of her ER training kicking in a half-second before her conscious brain caught up, dropping her flat to the floor of the safe house kitchen while glass exploded somewhere above her head. Park was shouting. So was already moving toward the front of the house, weapon drawn, and Junso was pulling Hannah bodily across the floor toward the back hallway, his voice low and urgent in a way she'd never heard from him before. Stay behind me, he said. Whatever happens, stay behind me. They made it out through a service door into an alley, into a car that Sue had apparently kept running and ready for exactly this scenario, and within 4 minutes they were moving through Atlanta traffic at a speed that made Hannah's stomach lurch, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold onto the door handle. That was them, wasn't it? Hannah said, once she trusted her voice enough to speak. Choi's people. Yes, Junso said. He looked, for the first time since Hannah had met him, genuinely rattled. They found the second safe house in 11 days. That's faster than it should have been possible. Which means the leak inside my organization is worse than I thought. They drove for 2 hours before Sue finally pulled into the parking garage of a hospital, of all places, the last location Hannah expected, until Junso explained, breathless, that it was the one place Choi's men would hesitate to attack directly. Too many cameras, too many witnesses, too much attention a hospital shooting would bring down on an organization that thrived on staying invisible. They're not going to just let us walk into a hospital and disappear, Hannah said. No, Junso agreed, but it buys us time, and time is the only thing I actually need right now. They stayed in that hospital for 6 hours, Junseo working furiously on a burner phone, coordinating with people Hannah had never heard of, trying to identify exactly how deep Choi Bumjin's reach inside his organization actually went. And it was there, in a hospital corridor that smelled achingly familiar to Hannah after 15 years working in places just like it, that she did something small, something that felt like nothing at the time, and would end up mattering more than anything else that happened that night. A young security guard came through the ER intake area, escorting a man with a minor knife wound, the kind of injury that got logged fast and forgotten faster on a busy night. Hannah, waiting nearby with nothing to do but watch the room, noticed the man gave a story about falling against a fence that didn't remotely match the clean, angled cut on his forearm. Old habits. She'd spent 15 years learning to read a wound faster than a patient could finish lying about it. She didn't think much of it at the time, just filed it away the way she filed away 100 small inconsistencies a week, and mentioned it to Junseo almost as an afterthought hours later, only because he'd asked if anything at all had felt strange that night. Describe him, Junseo said, suddenly very still. She did, the tattoo just visible at his wrist, the accent, the insurance card that didn't match the name on his ID, something she'd caught only because she'd logged it herself. Junso went pale. That's one of Choi's men, he said. Which means Choi had someone inside this exact hospital tonight, on this exact floor, which means he already knew where we were before we ever ran. If you think this is intense already, wait until you find out who's actually hunting that ring. Make sure you're subscribed, because you do not want to miss where this goes next. The confrontation came 4 days later, and it came exactly where Hannah least expected it. Her own hospital, back in Richmond, on a shift she'd insisted on returning to because she refused, on principle, to let her entire life stay frozen because of a war she never asked to be part of. Junso had argued against it. Park and Sue had argued against it. Hannah had gone anyway, because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, she had rediscovered a version of herself that refused to be managed, refused to be hidden away like something fragile, and she told Junso exactly that the night before her shift. I spent 4 years with a man who made every decision about my life feel smaller and smaller, until there was nothing left of me but what fit inside the space he allowed, Hannah said. I am not doing that again, not even for my own safety. If danger is coming, it can come find me at work, doing the one thing in this entire mess I actually still have control over. Choi Bum-jin's men found her 20 minutes into her shift. 3 of them, dressed like visitors, moving through the ER with a stillness that Hannah recognized instantly from her weeks around Park and Sue, the particular quality of men who were used to violence being an option rather than a last resort. Junso, against every rule of caution his own people had drilled into him, was already in the building, having refused to let her go alone despite her insistence, and it was his presence, not hers, that Choi Bum-jin's men were actually there for. The confrontation happened in a hallway just off the main triage bay. Low voices, no weapons drawn yet, but the threat of them heavy enough in the air that every nurse and doctor within 20 feet instinctively slowed their steps. Choi sends his regards, the lead man said to Junso. He wanted you to know he found it very interesting, the report about your nurse. Leave her out of this, Junso said. His voice dropped into something low and dangerous that Hannah had never heard from him before. She's already in it, the man said. Choi thinks it might be useful, actually, letting the whole organization see exactly what kind of woman the great Ri Junso chooses to protect. So instead of removing her, Choi has a different offer. Step down, publicly, hand control to someone Choi approves of, and she walks away untouched, and so does every patient in this building tonight. Hannah, who had been standing frozen at the edge of the hallway throughout this exchange, felt something in her chest go very still and very clear. No, she said, stepping forward before Junso could answer. You tell your boss something for me. I have spent 15 years documenting exactly what happens to every patient who walks through those doors, because in my job, if you don't write it down precisely, someone can die from the mistake. 3 weeks ago, one of your men came through my triage bay with a knife wound he told the intake nurse he got falling off a ladder. I logged his insurance information myself. It didn't match the name on his ID. I didn't think about it again until just now. The lead man's expression flickered, just slightly, but enough that Hannah saw it land. I still have that chart, Hannah said. And I imagine a man running shell accounts to fund an underground campaign against his own former employer would rather I hadn't noticed the same forged identity, showing up twice in hospital records, tied to 2 different addresses he thinks nobody's connected yet. The silence in the hallway changed texture completely. That's not leverage, the man said, but his voice had lost its certainty. It's a paper trail, Hannah said. And paper trails are the one thing men like Choi can't threaten into disappearing, because they don't live in a person's head, they live in a filing system. You can hurt me. You can't unfile a hospital record. Junso looked at her like he was seeing an entirely new version of the war he'd been fighting alone for weeks. Within 6 days, the forged identity Hannah had unknowingly documented became the thread that unraveled Choi Bum-jin's financial network entirely. Traced by people far more skilled than Hannah at pulling threads once she'd handed them the first one. Choi didn't go to prison. Men like him rarely do. But the network he'd spent 2 years building collapsed under its own weight, and the men who'd once answered to him quietly stopped answering at all. He never contacted Junso again. Word reached them eventually, secondhand, that Choi had left the country entirely, whatever remained of his ambitions gone with him. The ring finally came off 2 months later, in a small jewelry shop in Richmond, removed carefully by a craftsman Junso trusted completely. The 2 of them sitting together afterwards in a quiet cafe, while Hannah turned the empty space on her finger over and over, strangely unsettled by how light her hand suddenly felt.
You don't have to keep it. I know what it put you through.
I know I don't have to, but I think I want to. Not because of what it means to your family, because of what it ended up meaning to me. It taught me something. I don't think I would have learned any other way.
What is that?
That I stopped being someone people overlook the moment I stopped being afraid to take up space. I spent so many years making myself smaller so nobody would be inconvenienced by my needs. That ring, this whole impossible situation, it forced me to stop doing that. I'm not going back to being that quiet after this.
Jun Seo didn't reach for the ring sitting between them. Instead, a week later, he showed up at the hospital at the end of her shift, waited in the same triage hallway where she'd once stood down 3 armed men with nothing but a chart number, and handed her an envelope instead of a box. "What is this?" Hannah asked. "Open it," he said. Inside was a deed, a small building 2 blocks from the hospital, empty, zoned for medical use. "I looked into what it would take," Junso said, "for a nurse with 15 years of ER experience and more composure under pressure than anyone I have ever met, to open an urgent care clinic of her own. Not a gift, a loan, if you want to call it that, structured through my family's foundation, so it belongs to you and no one else, whether you and I last another year or 50. I am not proposing with this," he said. "I'm asking you to build something, and I'd like to be there while you do it." Hannah stared at the deed for a long time, then at him. "That's a strange way to ask someone to stay," she said. "It's the only way I know how to ask honestly," he said. "I already put a ring on your finger once without asking. I'm not making that mistake twice. When I ask you to marry me, and I will, it's going to be after you've built something that's entirely yours, so that no one, including you, ever wonders whether you said yes because you needed me to survive." 14 months later, Hannah Adams stood in front of a small clinic with her name on the lease, not his, watching her mother, steadier now, cut a ribbon across the door with Nova standing beside her in scrubs of her own. 3 years into the nursing career a scholarship had made possible. Junso stood at the back of the small crowd, the way he always did now, present, but never at the center of anything that was rightfully hers. That evening, in the empty clinic after everyone else had gone home, he finally asked her properly. No ring hidden in a jacket lining, no danger forcing either of their hands, just a question asked in full daylight to a woman who no longer needed saving from anything. Hannah Adams fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder outside Charlotte once, and woke up wearing a ring that changed the direction of her life. But the real story was never about the ring. It was about a woman who spent years making herself smaller, learning finally that the space she'd been afraid to take up was hers all along. If this story moved you, if any part of Hannah's journey reminded you that sometimes the most unexpected chapters end up being the ones that finally set you free, do me a favor before you go. Drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Hit that like button if you felt this one in your chest. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.